I thought I was ready for solitude. A month alone in a cabin, no phone service, no neighbors for miles. Just me, the trees, and the sound of the wind slicing through pine needles. But that night, when someone knocked on my door during the storm, I made the worst mistake of my life. I had rented the cabin from a retired ranger who swore no one would bother me up there. That was exactly what I wanted. No co-workers, no ex-girlfriend drama, no city noise buzzing in my skull. Just the cold air of Montana. The smell of wet wood and pine. And enough silence to drown out everything I was running from. The place was basic. One bedroom. A wood stove that smoked if I fed it too fast, and a generator that coughed more than it ran. At night, the darkness outside was so thick it felt like a living thing pressing against the windows. But I liked it. Or at least, I told myself I did. The first week passed uneventfully. I fished in the mornings, read old paperbacks in the afternoons, and tried to ignore the gnawing loneliness after sunset. It was the kind of quiet that made you hear your own heartbeat. Sometimes, I imagined footsteps crunching in the snow outside, only to remind myself that there was no one within 20 miles. Until the 7th night. The storm had rolled in fast, the kind that makes the cabin walls creak and the wind scream like it's trying to tear the roof off. I was dozing by the stove when the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate raps. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again. Harder. Impatient. I grabbed my flashlight and cracked the door open just enough to see a man standing there, soaked to the bone, shivering. He was tall, beard patchy and wild, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Lost," he said, voice hoarse over the wind. "Been walking for hours. Can I come in?" I hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed to keep the door shut, but there was a look in his eyes. Desperation, exhaustion, that made me step aside. I wish I hadn't. The man introduced himself as Aaron while peeling off his soaked jacket, dripping water onto the floorboards. I offered him a blanket and sat him by the stove. His hands trembled as he held them close to the flames. We didn't talk much at first. The wind outside filled the silence, howling like some animal circling the cabin. But as the minutes passed, something about him felt off. He wasn't acting like someone relieved to find shelter. He didn't ask for food or water. He just sat there, staring around the cabin like he'd been there before. His eyes kept darting toward my backpack in the corner, then to the axe I'd left leaning by the door. I tried to keep things casual. "Where were you headed before the storm hit?" He shrugged without looking at me. "Just passing through." It was vague, but I didn't press. I told myself not everyone talks freely, especially in a crisis. Still, my stomach tightened with unease. I made coffee for both of us, hoping to ease the tension. When I handed him the mug, he smiled. That smile froze me to my core. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. "You're Derek, right?" he asked casually, eyes locked on mine. My throat went dry. I'd never told him my name. My hands felt clammy against the ceramic mug. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He took a slow sip before answering. "Saw you in town a few days ago. Folks talk." But there was no town. Just a single gas station 20 miles south, where I'd stopped only once. And I hadn't spoken to anyone there. I nodded like his answer made sense, but every muscle in my body screamed to get him out of my cabin. My mind started running through options. Let him stay the night and hope he leaves, or make up an excuse and send him back into the storm. Neither felt safe. At one point, while I pretended to read my book, I caught him looking at me. Not at my face, but my hands, my neck, my backpack. studying me like a butcher studies cuts of meat. And then came the moment that made my blood run cold. He leaned back, stretched his arms lazily, and said with a faint grin, "You're a heavy sleeper, right?" I didn't answer. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I just forced a weak laugh and said I was turning in early. I locked my bedroom door that night, my pocket knife clutched in my hand under the blanket, sleep refusing to come. Every sound outside felt louder. The storm, the cabin, creaks, and footsteps on the wooden floorboards that weren't mine. Around 3 a.m., the wind had died down, but I was still wide awake. My hand ached from clutching the knife too tightly. I told myself I was being paranoid, that he was probably asleep on the couch. Then I heard it. A soft click. The sound of my bedroom doorknob turning, slow and deliberate. I froze, every muscle locked. The door rattled just enough to make the lock clink in its frame. Then silence. Whoever was on the other side just stood there, waiting. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow, ears straining. Finally, footsteps retreated across the living room floor. I didn't sleep a second after that. At first light, I forced myself out of bed, knife still in hand. The cabin was empty. The blanket I'd given him lay, folded neatly, on the couch, untouched. The door was slightly ajar, wind pushing it open and closed with a soft groan. I stepped outside, scanning the clearing. Snow had stopped falling, leaving behind footprints leading into the trees. 2 sets of prints. His coming in, and later, circling the cabin multiple times during the night. That's when I saw it. On my backpack, a torn corner of a folded note tucked under the strap. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Just 4 words, written in rushed, jagged letters. Next time, no lock. I backed toward the cabin, my pulse slamming in my ears, scanning the tree line for any sign of him. But the forest was still. Too still. I packed everything in under 10 minutes and left, not even bothering to put out the stove fire. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. Hours later, back on a main road, among other cars, other people. I never went back to that cabin. I never will. It's been 3 years since that night, but I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, my heart pounding, convinced someone is standing on the other side of my bedroom door. I've told myself 100 different stories to make sense of what happened. Maybe he really was just lost. Maybe he recognized me by chance. Maybe he was just trying to scare me. But deep down, I know the truth. There was nothing random about that knock on my door. That man came there for me. The way he looked at my hands. The way he circled the cabin while I slept. The way he promised. Because that's what it was. A promise. That he'd come back. Living off-grid seems peaceful. Romantic even. People imagine quiet sunsets, self-reliance, freedom. But what they never think about is how far you are from help when something goes wrong. There's no phone service. No neighbors to hear you scream. No one to knock on your door. Except the people you really, really don't want to meet. And when they do, you're nothing but a locked door away from whatever they came to take. I thought the desert would be quiet. No neighbors, no city sounds, no drama. Just sand, wind, and the occasional coyote howling at night. But after a few weeks living off-grid in that trailer, I started hearing footsteps outside. Slow, dragging footsteps circling my home in the dark. And one morning, I woke up to find proof that whoever was out there had been inside while I slept. After my divorce, I wanted to disappear. My life in Phoenix felt like a cage of traffic, pitying looks, and questions I didn't want to answer. So, I bought an old, beat-up Airstream, loaded it with supplies, and parked it on a plot of land I'd bought cheap in Utah. It was miles from the nearest highway, a flat stretch of sand and gravel, surrounded by distant, red cliffs. At night, the desert sky looked endless, stars spilling like a frozen river overhead. It felt like freedom. The trailer was rough, thin walls, a stove that coughed black smoke, a bed that squeaked if I even breathed wrong. But it was mine. My little escape from everything. Days were quiet. Too quiet, sometimes. I filled them fixing the water pump, walking the empty expanse, convincing myself I'd made the right choice, leaving everything behind. Nights. That's when things changed. At first it was just noises. I told myself it was wind or animals. But one night, lying awake, I heard it clearly. Gravel crunching under footsteps. Slow, measured. Circling the trailer. I held my breath, heart hammering. No one should have been there. No one even knew where I was. The sound stopped just outside my window. My mouth went dry as I stared at the thin curtain separating me from whatever was out there. Then, nothing. Just the desert silence pressing in until I convinced myself it was my imagination. The next morning I stepped outside and saw it. Footprints. Human. Bare feet. They circled the trailer twice before vanishing into the open desert. I wanted to believe it was some drifter passing through. But the prints came back the next night. And the next. By the fourth night, I couldn't pretend anymore. Someone was out there. Watching. I tried sleeping with a flashlight in my hand, but every sound outside made my skin prickle. The desert wasn't quiet anymore. It breathed around me, like something was always moving just beyond my sight. One evening, as the sun bled out over the horizon, I caught myself scanning the emptiness around my trailer, searching for shapes, movement, anything. But there was nothing. Just endless sand and silence. I started locking the trailer door with a metal bar wedged under the handle. I stacked empty cans by the step outside as a crude alarm. I told myself I was overreacting. Then came the morning that shattered whatever calm I had left. I woke up with my throat dry, my head heavy like I hadn't slept at all. As I sat up, my stomach dropped. My boots, which I'd left by the door, were now beside my bed, neatly lined up. I froze, staring at them. My pulse roared in my ears. I lived alone. I locked that door. That day, I searched the trailer inch by inch. The windows were latched, nothing broken, nothing stolen. But when I checked under the bed, I found it. A small pile of gravel, the same kind from outside. Neatly arranged, like it had been set there on purpose. That night, I barely breathed, knife in my hand, every muscle ready to spring. Hours passed, no footsteps, no noise. I thought maybe they were gone. Then, just after 2 a.m., something scraped along the metal side of the trailer. Slowly, like fingers, dragging across it. And then, a whisper. Muffled, low, right outside the thin wall by my head. A man's voice. Just 3 words that turned my blood to ice. You sleep deep. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Every hair on my body stood on end as those words sank in. Then came the sound of gravel crunching, footsteps moving toward the door. My grip on the knife tightened until my knuckles ached. The handle rattled softly, testing my makeshift lock. A pause. Then harder, deliberate. A low grunt of effort as whoever was outside tried to force it open. The metal bar held, but it felt like only a matter of time before it didn't. I swallowed hard, my breath ragged, my chest screaming to run, to do something. But where could I go? I was miles from anywhere, nothing but empty desert in every direction. Finally, the handle stopped rattling. Silence. long enough for my heart to pound like a drum in my ears. I thought maybe he'd gone. Until I heard it. A faint creak from the trailer's rear hatch, the emergency exit I never used. The hatch I never locked because I thought no one would ever need it. I spun around just as it swung open a few inches, desert air rushing in. A silhouette lingered in the dark gap, unmoving, crouched low like an animal waiting to pounce. I lunged forward, slammed it shut, and threw my whole weight against it. The force from the other side nearly knocked me backward. My knife clattered to the floor, useless. I grabbed the closest thing, an old wrench, and swung it against the metal door with everything I had, screaming like a madman. For a moment, the pressure held. Then, it was gone. The hatch rattled once, twice, and fell still. I stayed there, pressed against it, for what felt like an hour, my body trembling, tears stinging my eyes. When I finally opened it at dawn, there was nothing. Just 2 barefoot tracks leading away from the trailer, and a message scrawled in the sand with a fingertip. I can wait. I lasted one more night in that trailer, if you can even call it lasting. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the corner with my wrench in hand, listening, waiting, praying that the desert would stay quiet. By sunrise, I was already throwing everything into the back of my truck. I didn't even bother folding my blankets or packing food. I just needed to get out of there before he came back. The drive out was endless. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I half expected to see a figure walking behind me, barefoot, following the tire tracks I left in the dust. I sold the trailer a month later. Never went back to see that patch of land. Never even claimed the rest of the supplies I left inside. People think the desert is empty. That's why I went there. To disappear. To escape my old life. But it isn't empty. There's always someone watching. Someone who knows you're alone. That no one will hear you if you scream. And some nights, even now, when I hear gravel crunch under my apartment window, I wonder if he finally decided he's done waiting. You don't realize how fragile safety feels until you're days away from anyone who could help you. I went to the Alaskan wilderness to clear my head, to fish, to breathe. No phone service, no roads, just a cabin and the endless trees. But on my 3rd night, I woke up to someone standing inside my cabin, holding my satellite phone, smiling like they'd been waiting for me to open my eyes. After years of grinding away at a tech job in Seattle, I wanted out. My therapist said solitude might help me reset. So, I booked 2 weeks in a remote fishing cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness. The pilot who flew me in joked that the only things I had to worry about were bears and bad weather. No cell service, he said, tapping his radio. But this will get you out if things go south. He handed me a satellite phone before taking off, leaving me standing alone as his plane shrank to a dot in the gray sky. The cabin was rough but sturdy. Wood stove, fishing gear, a small cot. The kind of place that made you feel small in the middle of all that endless green. I spent my days hiking, casting lines in the river, losing track of time under skies that didn't seem to care about clocks. Nights were quieter than anything I'd ever known. No hum of traffic, no distant voices. Just the wind through the trees, the pop of the wood stove, and my own heartbeat in my ears. On the 3rd night, rain drummed on the roof, steady and calming. I fell asleep faster than usual, dreaming about walking down a long hallway with no doors. But sometime in the dead of night, I woke up. Not from a noise, but from a feeling. The kind of gut-deep awareness that someone else is in the room with you. My eyes adjusted to the dark. the dim glow of embers from the stove barely lighting the cabin. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The room was still, the rain still tapping softly on the roof. Then I saw it. A figure standing near the small table by the door, perfectly still, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to sit up, to grab the hatchet I kept by the bed, but fear pinned me like a weight. My eyes flicked to the table and my stomach turned to ice. The satellite phone. It was in his hand. The only way out of here, the one thing standing between me and total isolation, was now in the grasp of a stranger who shouldn't even be here. He didn't say a word, didn't move, just stood there, like he'd been waiting for me to wake up and notice him. I blinked hard, thinking I was dreaming, but when my eyes opened, he was closer. 2 steps near to my bed, the faintest outline of his face visible now. A beard, deep-set eyes, no expression at all. I finally found my voice. It cracked when I said, Who are you?" He tilted his head slightly, like he was confused by the question, or amused. Then, slowly, he placed the satellite phone back on the table. Not where it had been before, closer to him, out of my reach. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out into the rain, leaving the door wide open behind him. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, my pulse thundering in my ears, staring at that open door and half expecting him to come back in. But he didn't. Not that night. The next day, I searched every inch of the cabin and the surrounding trees. Nothing. No footprints in the mud. No sign of anyone. I wanted to believe I'd hallucinated it. Stress. Lack of sleep. Something. That night, I locked the door, dragged a dresser in front of it, kept the hatchet in my hand until dawn, and that's when I saw it. On the outside of the cabin door, written in mud with a fingertip, were 3 words. No one's coming. That night, the rain stopped. The forest was unnervingly silent. No rustle of wind, no owls, nothing. I sat on the cot, hatchet in hand, every muscle locked and tense. My plan was simple: stay awake until sunrise. But at some point, exhaustion won. I must have drifted for a few minutes because the sound that woke me was wrong. Wood creaking under slow, deliberate footsteps. Inside the cabin. My eyes shot open. The door was still barricaded, but he was already in. I gripped the hatchet, my breath shallow, heart hammering in my chest. From the shadows by the stove, I heard it. A low, steady breathing. Not mine. "Who are you?" My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, a voice from the dark, calm, like he'd been waiting for me to ask, "No one knows you're here." I didn't wait. I lunged toward the table, grabbed the satellite phone and bolted for the door, shoving the dresser aside in a panic. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. I ran into the trees, barefoot, rain-soaked ground cold and sharp beneath me. I didn't look back. I just kept running, tripping over roots, branches tearing at my arms. When I finally dared to glance behind me, I saw him, standing in the cabin doorway, motionless, head tilted like before, watching me disappear into the dark. The phone slipped from my hands 3 times before I could call for help. My voice a broken mess as I begged the pilot to come back for me. He promised first light. I spent the next 3 hours crouched under a fallen tree, clutching that phone like my life depended on it. I didn't hear him approach, but at one point, I swear, I felt him nearby. The weight of eyes on me in the pitch-black forest. When the plane finally came, I didn't look back. I climbed aboard barefoot, shivering, covered in mud. The pilot kept asking what happened, but all I could say was, "Just go. Please. Go." From the air, I looked down at the cabin one last time. Someone stood outside it, watching the plane lift off. Back in Seattle, people told me I must have imagined it. Sleep deprivation, stress, maybe even a wild hunter who thought the cabin was his. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And most of all, I know what I felt. The kind of dread that gets under your skin and stays there, whispering that you were seconds away from not making it out alive. I don't go camping anymore. I don't hike alone. And every night before I sleep, I check the locks twice. Then 3 more times. Because I know something now that most people never think about. Out there, in the silence, far from help, it only takes one person deciding that your life is theirs to play with. And when I close my eyes, I can still see him in that doorway, head tilted, watching me, like he was waiting for another chance.